Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more common sense. Today we're diving back into the works of Mr. Bertrand Russell. This is In Praise of Idleness and Other Essays. We are on Youthful Cynicism. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you were unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be exploring ideologies, where we talk about why bad ideas should not be allowed to propagate. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of In Praise of Idleness with On Youthful Cynicism. Now, cynicism is a negative mindset. It is always assuming the worst from people. Bear that in mind as we go through this. Any person who visits the universities of the Western world is liable to be struck by the fact that the intelligent young of the present day are cynical to a far greater extent than was the case formerly. That is a subjective opinion, right? And it is one which is fairly common to have, to believe that the next generation is falling away from the beliefs of the former generation, that they have less positivity. But it is vitally important to remember that the school of cynicism dates back to the Greeks. This is not true of Russia, India, China, or Japan. I believe it is not the case in Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Poland, nor by any means universally in Germany. But it is certainly a notable characteristic of intelligent youth in England, France, and the United States. To understand why youth is cynical in the West, we must also understand why it is not cynical in the East. Young men in Russia are not cynical because they accept, on the whole, the communist philosophy. That is untrue. They are not allowed to be displeasured, right? That was literally communism under the USSR, which he is explicitly talking about here. If you assumed the worst intentions for Stalin, they shot you. If you assumed the worst intentions for your local leaders, they shot you. And if they didn't shoot you, they sent you to the gulags where you would be buried underneath a road because they couldn't be bothered to give you an individual grave. That is why the people in Russia were not cynical. It's not that they weren't cynical, it's that they had no freedom to express cynicism. That is important. The communist philosophy, and they have a great country full of natural resources ready to be exploited by the help of intelligence. The young have, therefore, a career before them which they feel to be worthwhile. You do not have to consider the ends of life when in the course of creating utopia, you are laying a pipeline, building a railway, or teaching peasants to use 4 tractors simultaneously on a 4-mile front. Now, it is important to note that, once again, we have the lens of history to look back upon. And we have several experiments in which we have attempted to recreate utopia. Utopia being where you do not have to extend yourself for the care of yourself. And what in particular one of these studies was, they took a group of rats. And I can't remember the name of the study. If you know, drop it down below. But they created a colony of rats in this elaborate habitat. And they gave them all of the food, all of the water, any resource that you can think of that a rat might enjoy. They gave them pleasurable things. They allowed them the luxury of always having it. And what happened was it degenerated fairly rapidly into unsustainability, right? Without the drive to go out and hunt for food, the rats became exceedingly lazy. They got fat. They didn't do a whole lot. They were not active, even though they had all of the things which they could pleasurably be active with, right? Running wheels and things of that nature. They also segregated themselves by sex. It got exceedingly hard for intercourse to happen for the rats because of that segregation. It was quite a thing to go back and look at. Utopia, as it turns out, is not something that we necessarily need to be striving for. You are meant to work. You're not meant to sit on your ass. Refer back to In Praise of Laziness, which we started this study with, and I know that is not the same terms. You are meant to take your leisure. You should have leisure in your life, but your life should not be centered around leisure. Your life should be centered around a goal, something that you wish to accomplish. And in part, he is intimating that here, but he is completely wrong through the lens of history, right? There will never be a utopia. There will never be you are completely taken care of and you're happy. That is not going to happen. You, however, can find happiness in your struggle. We talk about that a lot because it is an important thing. Do not rely upon the government to give you happiness because they will not do it. Consequently, the Russian youth are vigorous and filled with ardent beliefs. In India, the fundamental belief of the earnest young is in the wickedness of England. Now, experimentally, they have reason to believe in that in India. If you are unaware of the English conquest of the Indian subcontinent, you should definitely look into that and find out why the Indians might be just a little bit upset by what happened from England. From this premise, as from the existence of Descartes, it is possible to deduce a whole philosophy. From the fact that England is Christian, it follows that Hinduism or Mohammedanism, as the case may be, is the only true religion. No. You can find that, but there are several other ones, right? Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, there's a lot. And that's not even getting to the ones on the North American continent. And so, yeah. From the fact that England is capitalistic and industrial, it follows, according to the temperament of the logician concerned, either that everybody ought to spin with a spinning wheel, or that productive duties ought to be imposed to develop native industrialism and capitalism as the only weapons with which to combat those of the British. From the fact that the British hold India by physical force, it follows only that moral force is admirable. The persecution of nationalist activities in India is just sufficient to make them heroic, and not sufficient to make them seem futile. In this way, the Anglo-Indians save the intelligent youth of India from the blight of cynicism. In China, and are you really trying to tell me, you're really trying to tell me that India, under the rule as subjects of England, which was enacted and maintained through force of arms and led to the suppression of the native cultures, did not produce cynics? Is that what you're trying to tell me? That there was nobody automatically assuming the worst of the British? Nobody. Nobody was assuming in India, in the times of the colonies, that the British had bad intentions. That's your argument. I bet. In China, hatred of England has also played its part, but a much smaller part than in India because the English have never conquered the country. The inconsistency of thought that this man expresses is fucking wild. The Chinese youth combine patriotism with a genuine enthusiasm for Occidentalism in the kind of way that was common in Japan 50 years ago. They want the Chinese people to be enlightened, free, and prosperous. And they have their work cut out to produce the result. This was just about the time the Chinese took the great leap forward, which was so wonderful and absolutely positively destroyed cynicism in the country, I am sure. Their ideals are, on the whole, those of the 19th century, which, in China, have not yet begun to seem antiquated. Cynicism in China was associated with the officials of the imperial regime and survived among the warring materialists who have distracted the country since 1911. But it has no place in the mentality of modern intellectuals. In Japan, the outlook of young intellectuals is not unlike that which prevailed on the continent of Europe between 1815 and 1848. The watchwords of liberalism are still potent. Parliamentary government, liberty on the subject, free thought, and free speech. The struggle for these against traditional feudalism and autocracy is quite sufficient to keep young men busy and enthusiastic. To the sophisticated youth of the West, all this ardor seems a trifle crude. He is firmly persuaded that having studied everything impartially, that is something he has not done, he has seen through everything and found that there is nothing left remarkable beneath the visiting moon. There are, of course, plenty of reasons for this in the teachings of the old. I do not think these reasons go to the root of the matter, for, in other circumstances, the young react against the teachings of the old and achieve a gospel of their own. If the Occidental youth of the present day react only by cynicism, there must be some special reason for this circumstance. Not only are the young unable to believe what they are told, but they seem also unable to believe anything else. This is a peculiar state of affairs which deserves investigation. Let us first take some of the old ideals, one by one, and see why they no longer inspire the old loyalties. We may enumerate among such ideals religion, country, progress, beauty, truth. What is wrong with these in the eyes of the young? Religion. The trouble here is partly intellectual, partly social. For intellectual reasons, few able men have now the same intensity of religious beliefs as was possible for, say, St. Thomas Aquinas. The God of most moderns is a little vague and apt to degenerate into a life force or a power, not ourselves, that makes for righteousness. Even believers are concerned much more with the effects of religion in this world than with that other world that they profess to believe in. They are not nearly so sure that this world was created for the glory of God as they are that God is a youthful hypothesis for improving the world. By subordinating God to the needs of this sublunary life, they cast suspicion upon the genuineness of their faith. They seem to think God, like the Sabbath, was made for man. There are also sociological reasons for not accepting the churches as the basis for a modern idealism. The churches, through their endowments, have become bound up with the defense of property. Moreover, they are connected with an oppressive ethic which condemns many pleasures that to the young appear harmless, and inflicts many torments that to the skeptical appears unnecessarily cruel. I have known earnest young men who accepted wholeheartedly the teachings of Christ. They found themselves in opposition to official Christianity, outcast and victims of persecution, quite as much as if they had been militant atheists. I'm going to pause here because I spend a great deal of time in religion. I have one of these playlists that is linked in the corner above, an unconventional Bible study. I went into that Bible study not intending to wind up where I was. It did not start out with the title of an unconventional Bible study. It started out as Lessons from the Book. But I went through in the same manner that we are doing here. I read aloud and discussed as I went along the various points that were brought to light by the text. And it was through those 161 videos that I left Christianity. I believe in God wholeheartedly and fully, but I do not believe that any religion has a correct interpretation of who God is. If there is one that does have the correct interpretation, I haven't run across it, and I do not even hold that I necessarily have the correct interpretation of what God is. I believe that God is everything. It is every single atom in existence and all of the space between those atoms. There are many reasons to leave Christianity, to leave Judaism, to leave Mohammedanism, to leave any particular reason. That does not mean that you have to, or even that you should. People find God in different ways and different expressions of it. Doubting those things do not make you cynical. Now, I have a rather cynical view upon the church. I believe that Judaism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism, at a minimum, were created as control systems. They were created to separate this particular group from all of the people around them, to give them a measure of control in their lives and to control those lives to a measure. And so I hold a rather cynical view of the founders, right? I do not believe that the Catholic Church has anything at all to do with the teachings of Christ, for very good and valid reasons, which I expound upon in that particular study. If you are interested in any of that, the Bible study is a very long slog, but we go through piece by piece and talk about these scriptures the same way that I talk about Russell Bertrand or Helena Blavatsky or any of the other works that we do. There is plenty of reason to leave the church. They don't necessarily have to be cynical, however. Country. Patriotism has been in many times and places a passionate belief to which the best minds could give full assent. It was so in England in the time of Shakespeare, in Germany in the time of Fish, in Italy in the time of Mazzini. It is so still in Poland, China, and outer Mongolia. In the Western nations, it is still immensely powerful. It controls politics, public expenditure, military preparations, and so on. But the intelligent youth are unable to accept it as an adequate ideal. That is dumb. They perceive that it is all very well for oppressed nations, but that as soon as an oppressed nation achieves its freedom, the nationalism, which was formerly heroic, becomes oppressive. The Poles, who had the sympathy of idealists ever since Maria Theresa, wept but took, have used their freedom to organize oppression in Ukraine. The Irish, upon whom the British had inflicted civilization for 800 years, have used their freedom to pass laws preventing the publication of many good books. Who defines good? The spectacle of the Poles murdering Ukrainians and the Irish murdering literature makes nationalism seem a somewhat inadequate ideal for even a small nation. That is not a logical conclusion. Because this one nation has used something to oppress another nation is not a reason to not take pride in your nation. Especially if that's not your nation. I'm not Polish. I don't take any pride in Poland. I'm American. United States of America in specificity, and I am extremely proud of this country. We have given freedom to more people than ever in the history of ever. We have given relief to economic freedom to more people than ever in the history of ever. We are so prosperous that we have fat, homeless people. But when it comes to a powerful nation, the argument is even stronger. The Treaty of Versailles was not very encouraging to those who had the luck not to be killed in defending the ideals which their rulers betrayed. That's an interesting turn on that. Those who during the war averred that they were combating militarism became at its conclusion the leading militarist in their respective countries. Such facts have made it obvious to all intelligent young men that patriotism is the chief cause of our age and will bring civilization curse of our age, and will bring civilization to an end, if not something mitigated. Now, this is stupid, right? Bertrand Russell has many things that he says that are really just stupid. This is one of them, right? The logical fallacy of his argument we just pointed out, right? Because one person uses a thing for the oppression of other people does not necessarily make it bad. That doesn't, right? Like, what we have done here in this country was begin an experiment of freedom. Now, in the beginning, it was a limited scope of freedom. We just said, hey, you know what? We are no longer going to be slaves to the crown. We are going to rebel, and we are going to form a new nation based upon this code of law as a democratic republic, a constitutional democratic republic. We did not have a full understanding of freedom or even humanity at that point, but over the course of time, it was brought to light that, hey, these people that you are severely abusing are indeed human beings, and as such, they have the right to determine their own self-value. And we fought a war over that. We paid the price in blood for that. And we advanced the ideals of freedom. And we gave freedom to a whole new class of people uniquely upon the earth. That is something to take pride in. That was something that this nation did, right? England paid their slavers off. We killed them. That is a significant difference in life, right? We can be proud of our actions here for extending freedom to more people. Did we get it right away? No. Did it take a little while for attitudes to adjust? Yes. Was it oppressive? Still. Yes. Was there injustice? Still. Yes. But over the course of time, here in this country, we have continued to extend rights to people. We have continued to identify, hey, these people are not being treated fairly. Let us extend to them freedom. That is something in which we can take pride as a nation. We have done that here as a nation. That is nationalism. That I have pride in. I am patriotic that we here extend freedom to more people. That is something you can be cynical about, but I am not. I am proud of my country. That is nationalism. Not, well, these other people believed in nationalism and they did horrible things. Well, here we believe in nationalism and we did wonderful things. Did we get it right every time? Nope. Are we in the pursuit of correctness? Yes. That is the difference between us and every other nation on the planet. I believe that this nation is exceptional for that reason. Progress. This is a 19th century ideal which has had too much. I really wish this was a better copy. Too much something about it for the sophisticated youth. Measurable progress is necessarily in unimportant things such as the number of motor cars made or the number of peanuts consumed. The really important things are not measurable and are therefore not suitable for the methods of booster. Moreover, many modern inventions tend to make people silly. Wow. I might, if instance, the radio, the talkies, and poison gas. Shakespeare measured the excellence of an age by its style in poetry, see sonnet, but this mode of measurement is out of date. This is a logical fallacy. You are taking your limited measure and applying it, but I can make the argument. We have had progress in freedom. The example I just used, that is an appropriate one. Here's another one. We have lifted more people out of poverty than ever in the history of ever. Here, in this country, that is progress. We have fat homeless people, and while that is horrible, it is still progress. You know what happened to homeless people in the olden days? They starved to death. They died. That's what happened to them. Nowadays, they get government benefits, and while we can argue about that, they're alive. They're so alive that they have access. We have homeless people with a computer, right? Like, they have one of these. They have a smartphone. They can access the internet. That is progress. You can make arguments about whether it is beneficial progress, but it is progress from where we were. It is a measurable statistic. We are better now than we were in 1776. 1,000%. We are better now than we were in 1866. 1,000%. And I know 1,000% is an extrapolate, like a can't think of the word, more than, right? It is excessive, right? I am being intentionally satirical in that. We are measurably better than we were in the past. That is progress. His logical fallacies. I think this is beauty. There is something that sounds old-fashioned about beauty, though it is hard to say why a modern painter would be indignant if he were accused of seeking beauty. Most artists nowadays appear to be inspired by some kind of rage against the world, that's because of cynicism, so that they wish rather than to give significant pain than to afford serene satisfaction. Like, that is because of the idleness of our lives, right? The more that we become idle, the more cynical we become. And the more cynical we become, the more that we idolize is not quite the right word, but put on a pedestal the things of pain, right? Well, look at this expression of pain. Moreover, many kinds of beauty require that a man should take himself more seriously than is possible for an intelligent, modern. A prominent citizen of a small city-state, such as Athens or Florence, could without difficulty feel himself important. The earth was the center of the universe. Man was the purpose of creation. His own city showed man at his best, and he himself was among the best in his own city. In such circumstances, Aeschylus, or Dante, could take his own joys or sorrows seriously. He could feel that the emotions of the individual matter and that tragic occurrences deserve to be celebrated in immortal verse. But the modern man, when misfortune assails him, is conscious of himself as a unit in a statistical total. The past and the future stretch before him in a dreary procession of trivial defeats. Man himself appears as a somewhat ridiculous, strutting animal, shouting and fussing during a brief interlude between infinite silences. Unaccommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare-forked animal, says King Lear, and the idea drives him to madness because it is unfamiliar. But to the modern man, the idea is familiar and drives him to only triviality. This, again, is just not logical, right? It is making an assumption based upon your own personal experience. Because you don't find the beauty, you assume that nobody else does, right? That is probably along the lines of the straw man fallacy. It may fit in better somewhere else, but that is not logical reasoning. We still, today, have people that strive for beauty. We still have artists that are doing the best they can to represent beauty. Many of them also represent pain, right? Those are not necessarily unrelated, right? You find beauty because pain makes the beauty stand out, right? This is, again, just not logical. Like, it is a statement of something that could be true, but is not necessarily fundamentally true as a fundamental truth. That is a severe problem. Truth. Here we go. In old days, truth was absolute, eternal, and superhuman. Myself, when young, accepted this view and devoted a misspent youth to the search for truth. But a whole host of enemies have arisen to slay truth. Pragmatism, behaviorism, psychologism, relativity physics. Galileo and the Inquisition disagreed as to whether the earth went round the sun or the sun went round the earth. Both agreed in thinking that there was a great difference between these two opinions. The point on which they agreed was the one on which they were both mistaken. The difference is only one of words. In old days, it was possible to worship truth. And no, hold on. That is not real, right? Okay, first off, just because you believe something does not make it true. That is a fundamental truth. But it is a truth that we move through space. That is a truth. It is a truth that we revolve around the sun. That is a truth. It is not a truth that the sun revolves around us. The sun passes fairly closely to a linear progression. We do not. Even if, as is possible according to the Tycho's model of the solar system, it is possible that we revolve around the sun or we revolve around some other object in our universe, but either way, we are the ones revolving. The sun, for the main part, not entirely because, again, everything is in relative, but relative to the orientation of the galaxy, the universe, the sun moves in a fairly linear fashion. It is slightly curved because it is orbiting around something else, which science has not even really caught up with. But the planet moves in a particular pattern, whether that is around the sun or another object in space. We are the thing moving. That is truth. It is measurable. It is reproducible by independent viewing from different locations. That is a truth. You will live. You will die. Those are truths. Most of the other things in between those things are subjective, right? You will be happy. That's a subjective thing. You will be sad. That is probably true, but it is not necessarily entirely true for the entirety of your life. You understand where I'm going with this? Like, there are truths. There are fundamental things that are inescapable. 1 + 1 = 2 every fucking time. Unless you are playing some weird game with reality. Right? People do that and they're like, well, 1 + 1 does not really equal 2 because 1 + 1 is 3, and you're fucking dumb. Right? You can extrapolate, you can speculate, but that doesn't make it fundamental. Fundamental truth is reproducible by independence. That is rotation in space. That is fundamental existence. That is the alterability of that existence. These things are fundamentally true. Most of these subjective things, whether or not there is a God, we will not know that. I fully believe that there is. Fully, with my whole chest, I serve the God of creation. But I could be wrong, right? That is subjective. The fact that the moon rotates around the earth is not. That is a thing that happens. It is true. So just because somebody holds subjectivity as a truth does not mean that it was ever a truth. Indeed, the sincerity of the worship was demonstrated by the practice of human sacrifice. That is true for many religions that people do not even understand. But it is difficult to worship a merely human and relative truth. The law of gravitation, according to Eddington, is only a convenient convention of measurement. It is not truer than other views, any more than the metric system is truer than feet or yards. That is a point, right? That is the point that I'm making. Just because you believe that it is true does not mean that it is fundamentally true, but there is fundamental truths, right? You can measure with either the metric or the English system. That is a fundamental truth. Which one is more correct is subjective. Gravity has an effect, but how that effect happens, we don't understand, even today. Whether it is an attractive or a repulsive force, whether it is due to mass or centripetal, we do not fully understand, right? As far as I am aware, I may be wrong, but as far as I understand, we believe that gravity is a thing because it is measurable and demonstrable, but we do not know why it is a thing. I tend more towards the attractive nature of the electromagnetics than I do to a force of pushing or anything of that nature. But again, that is subjective. The fact that if I throw something in the air, it will come down, that is truth. Even if we do not have the full definition of that truth, it is still a truth that we have not fully discovered. Nature and nature's laws may lay hid in night. God said, "Let Newton be," and measurement was facilitated. I've never seen that quote. That's funny. The sentiment seems to lack in sublimity. When Spinoza believed anything, he considered that he was enjoying the intellectual love of God. The modern man believes either with Marx that he is swayed by economic motives, or with Freud, that some sexual motive underlies his belief in the exponential theorem in the distribution of fauna in the Red Sea. That is a extremely funny way to take a dig at Freud, right? Freud got a couple of things right, but he got a whole lot more wrong. He projected his own beliefs as fact. That is something that we can get into if we ever get to the works of Freud, which probably will not happen unless the crew absolutely demands that it happens, because I am much more of a Jungian when it comes to psychology than I will ever be a Freudian. And yes, I have studied both of them. In neither case can he enjoy Spinoza's exaltation. So far, we have been considering modern cynicism in a rationalistic manner, have you? Have you indeed? That is subjective. As something that has intellectual causes. Belief, however, as modern psychologists are never weary of telling us, is seldom determined by rational motives, and the same is true of disbelief, though skeptics often overlook this fact. That is true, right? Your prejudices more often than not influence what you will accept. The causes of any widespread skepticism are likely to be sociological rather than intellectual. The main cause, always, is comfort without power. The holders of power are not cynical, since they are able to enforce their ideas. That again is a logical fallacy. That is untrue. Do you not think that Stalin was, well, you didn't think that Stalin was, but Stalin was cynical. He absolutely believed that everybody was doing things with ulterior motives. That is evident through his actions. The same is true for Lenin. The same was true for Marx. Right? These were holders of power, even if it was only intellectual power, as in the case of Marx. But Stalin and Lenin held very real, literal power, and they were cynical, right? Your definition of cynical is not correct. Victims of oppression are not cynical, since they are filled with hate, and hate, like any other strong passion, brings with it a train of attendant beliefs. That is victim mentality, and I am not in the slightest bit surprised to find that in this essay, because it has been in every single one of them we have went through so far. Cynicism is the belief that somebody else is always acting with ulterior motives. You're attributing that to something, but that doesn't mean that it is not something that exists, right? They are cynical, even if they have a reason for being cynical. That is important. Like, that is important, and that is something you are dismissing completely. But I'm not surprised, because you love to give the victim the power, right? I am being victimized. I am held back because of someone else. That's victim mentality. This race is responsible for me not having opportunities. That is victim mentality. The government is set up to detrimentally affect me. That is victim mentality. I can't diet because I am just not built that way. I've got PCOS. My insulin resistance is too high. I can't do the steps. Just because you have a reason for your cynicism doesn't mean that you're not cynic. And just because you may have a reason to be a victim does not mean that you're not having a victim mentality. Even if you're afflicted by a disease, it is still possible to take charge of your health. But more than likely, if you have a disease, you will use that as an excuse not to take charge of your health. I did that for a decade, right? I am injured. If you don't know now. I have severe injuries, 13 problems in my spine, 7 bulges, 6 herniations, 3 spinal impingements, nervous problems for 10 years, better than 10 years, closer to 12. I was perfectly fine with that, right? I used that excuse to restrict myself from doing things. Now, through the practical application of magic, which you may not believe in, but I do, I have, in large part, healed myself, but that has been through getting rid of the victim mentality, taking direct responsibility for my own life. Despite the fact that I have these spinal problems, I am working myself towards 5K a day. That's 3.1 miles a day if you're unaware. Am I there yet? No. Am I getting there? Yeah, quite rapidly, as a matter of fact. But it is only because I have refused to let the victim mentality rule. Nobody would have said anything, right? If I would have just continued collecting Social Security disability for the rest of my life, nobody would have said a thing. All of my doctors are, like, my doctors throw pills at me when I go. I haven't been in a while, but they're like, here, take this pill. It'll make you feel less pain. I am doing that without the pills. They were attempting to keep me a victim of the medical system. I refuse. Right? Your mindset makes all of the difference in your life. It doesn't make a difference in anyone else's life unless they are directly related to you and you are dragging them down because of your negativity. A positive mindset, taking charge of your own actions, will do more for you than any victim mentality will. Don't let these people make you a victim. Back to the text. Until the advent of education, democracy, and mass production, intellectuals had everywhere a considerable influence upon the march of affairs, which was by no means diminished if their heads were cut off. The modern intellectual finds himself in a quite different situation. It is by no means difficult for him to obtain a fat job and a good income, provided he is willing to sell his services to the stupid rich, either as a propagandist or a court jester. So, bruh, you are the court jester here. So, you can't have the ability to think and work for someone else, right? It is by no means difficult for the modern intellectual to obtain a fat job and a good income. So somebody with education and the ability to think. Well, yeah, you're not going to have a problem finding employment. It's not going to happen. But it doesn't have to be as a propagandist or a court jester. Or even to the stupid rich. That's not a thing that has to happen. You can create your own income sources, your own income streams. You can do that by having intelligence, by becoming educated. The effect of mass production and elementary education is that stupidity is more firmly entrenched than at any other time since the rise of civilization. That is again victim mentality. When the Tsarist government killed Lenin's brother, it did not turn Lenin into a cynic. Since hatred inspired a lifelong activity in which he was finally successful. No, you are wrong. It did indeed it was probably a driving factor into him deciding that everybody had an ulterior motive. And it is evident through his writings that he believed that. But in the more solid countries of the West, there is seldom such potent cause for hatred or such opportunity for spectacular revenge. The work of the intellectuals is ordered and paid for by the government or rich men, whose aims probably seem absurd, if not pernicious, to the intellectuals concerned. But a dash of cynicism enables them to adjust their consciences to the situation. They are, as it is true, some activities in which wholly admirable work is desired by the powers that be. The chief of these is science, and the next is public architecture in America. But if a man's education has been literary, as is still too often the case, he finds himself at the age of 22 with a considerable skill that he cannot exercise in any matter that appears important to himself. Men of science are not cynical, even in the West, because they can exercise their best brains with the full approval of the community. But in this they are exceptionally fortunate among modern intellectuals. There are absolutely cynics in the science community. If this diagnosis is right, modern cynicism cannot be cured merely by preaching, or by putting better ideals before the young than those that their pastors and masters fish out from the rusty armory of outworn superstitions. The cure will only come when intellectuals can find a career that embodies their creative impulses. I do not see any prescription except the one advocated by Disraeli, educate our masters, but it will have to be a more real education than is commonly given at the present day to either proletarians or plutocrats. And it will have to be an education taking some account of real cultural values, and not only of the utilitarian desire to produce so many goods that nobody has the time to enjoy them. A man is not allowed to practice medicine unless he knows something of the human body, but a financier is allowed to operate freely, without any knowledge at all of the multifarious effects of his activities, with the sole exception of the effect upon his bank account. How pleasant a world would be in which no man was allowed to operate on the stock exchange unless he could pass an examination in economics and Greek poetry, and in which politicians were obliged to have a competent knowledge of history and modern novels. History, I will grant you; modern novels, less. This is a horrible, horrible argument. No one should be able to take the fruit of their labor and to invest it in the manner in which they so choose. How dare you, sir? Are you kidding me? That's your argument. Nobody should be able to invest in the stock exchange unless he knows Greek poetry? Are you fucking kidding me? Now, you should, before you make any financial decision, have a relative understanding of economics. But I will argue Bertrand Russell did not have an understanding of economics. He may have been a good at polymath. I will grant you that. But economics is so much more than that. It is the interconnectedness of things. And so you investing privately in a public company is your prerogative. It has been a great driver of economic security. But I will grant the stock market is not the best indicator of economic security. Real goods sold, that is, imports and exports, the ratio between, that's a good the living wages that people maintain and receive, that's good indicators, right? Whether or not the stock market is high or low really doesn't play, or it plays more than it probably should, because people do not understand the interconnectedness. You should have a very firm financial grasp on the speculum of the company, right? What they intend to do and the method by which they intend to get there. You should know that before you invest. You should know what the possible detriments of that investment may be, right? Whether you are funding something that can be inimical to humanity, such as creating bioweapons, for instance. You should be aware of that before you do it. You should have an education. I will grant that economics is an important thing to understand. But to say that somebody has to have a degree before they can invest their money, no, fuck you, every time. Simply because an uneducated man can work his ass off and invest in something with no literacy whatsoever. He can go through an intermediary, because that will be necessary if he can't read, and find an appropriate investment, and he should be allowed to do so. You should not gatekeep the ability for someone else to make money. The government should not be involved in deciding who can invest in particular stocks. Now, you can make the argument that at a certain point in the largesse generated from that, there should be restrictions on what they can do. There has been a very good argument here recently made that an individual investment company who is grossing more than I think there was like 500 million was the number thrown, shouldn't be able to buy an individual house, right, for the purpose of reselling. Your motivation for that is not going to be the same as me selling my house, or even if I am a landlord with a few houses, regulating the rent of those houses. Your motivations as a multi-billion-dollar corporation is not going to be the same as mine, so there may be some reason for a limitation on that type of a private investment. But that is intrinsically tied to economics, right? The scarcity in the housing market currently is almost entirely due to that. The rise in prices in the housing market is almost entirely due to the investment of these particular companies. And so we can definitely see that there may need to be some adjustment there. That is the type of government regulation that I am in favor of. The oppressive overreach of the excessive, right? There comes a point where you do indeed have too much money. You are doing something wrong if you are accumulating that much money. You just are. There are better things you could do with it than let it sit in a bank. But again, on a personal level, that's your choice. On a corporate level, the government can get involved. And to say that you can't be a politician unless you read modern novels. So, you can't be a senator unless you've read 50 Shades of Grey? Well, that's a wild statement. Imagine a magnate confronted with the question: if you were to make a corner in wheat, what effect would this have upon German poetry? Causation, in the modern world, is more complex and remote in its ramifications than it ever was before, owing to the increase of large organizations. But those who control these organizations are ignorant men who do not know the 100th part of the consequences of their actions. I disagree with that. I just believe that they are too cynical to take appropriate action. BlackRock, Blackstone, whatever it's called, you know what I'm talking about, does not have the same motivations that we do. Like we just talked about that. But to say that they do not understand that cornering the market in housing is going to cause housing prices to rise is foolish. That is what he is saying, right? These people who have been as successful in investment to the point where they are distinguished from their peers do indeed know what they are doing. They are just not affected by the morality of the situation, mainly because they are cynics. Rabelais published his book anonymously for fear of losing his university post. A modern Rabelais would never write the book because he would be aware that his anonymity would be penetrated by the perfected methods of publicity. The rulers of the world have always been stupid, but have not in the past been so powerful as they are now. It is therefore more important than it used to be to find some way of securing that they shall be intelligent. Is this problem insoluble? I do not think so, but I should be the last to maintain that it is easy. that's going to bring us to the end of On Youthful Cynicism. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand I hold some unconventional views, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I really do believe that I have been fairly effective in pointing out just how stupid Mr. Russell is, right? He has no problem calling other people unintelligent. He has no problem calling people stupid. He has not been logically consistent once in any of these, right? He has had a couple of points that do pass muster, right? The large organization point was exactly the same one that I was making, but he doesn't realize that, right? Most of this argument is fallacious, right? It is based upon fallacy. A great deal of all of his arguments is based upon these other people are holding me back from achieving what I want. That can be possible in other places, right? It is not possible here. In this country, in the modern age at least, it was different then to a large degree, but now you determine your destiny. You get to decide where you're going, and nobody's holding you back. There is no grand conspiracy to hold back people of color. It is not even a systemic issue. It's really not. And if you think that it is, you're playing into victim mentality. You are assuming the role of a victim. There are very valid things that can hold you back, right? Physical disability, I cannot go work construction, right? Even though I am working my way towards running 3 miles a day, I can't go back to construction. There are limitations that do hold you back, but it is way too easy to take a limitation that might hold you back and allow it to continue to hold you back. I did that with my injuries. I said that there's no way I can grab a hold of my health. I was wrong. I have been proven wrong. I was victim to a victim mentality. This injury has made me a victim, and there's no way out of it. That's victim mentality. I cannot get off of welfare because the white man is holding me back. That's victim mentality. I can't get a job because DEI has shut me out. That is victim mentality, even though there is a measure of truth in that particular one. There is no systemic holding you back. Not in this country, period. You determine your fate, and you have to decide that you want to. If you don't decide that you want to, nothing is ever going to change in your life. If you don't make the determination that you are important enough, you're going to sit exactly where you are, and you may even deserve it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I have said here, leave it in the comments, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that I am doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because the bills do not pay themselves. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.